A shadow entered Dee Dee Blanchard's bedroom, and in the suffocating silence of that dark Missouri home, everything was about to change. In just a few moments, a murder would expose years of deception, manipulation, and hidden torment that no one on the outside truly understood. Because the girl the world believed was fragile, dying, and hopelessly confined to a wheelchair was not who she seemed to be. And the mother everyone admired, pitied, and praised as a saint was hiding secrets so disturbing that when the truth finally surfaced, millions were left stunned, heartbroken, and deeply unsettled. What happened inside that house was not simply the story of a killing. It was the implosion of an illusion so elaborate, so emotionally manipulative, that even now people still argue over which part of this case is the most horrifying. Was it the murder itself? Or was it the twisted life that may have led to it? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we are stepping into one of the most unsettling true crime cases ever told, a story of captivity disguised as care, of abuse hidden beneath affection, and of a daughter whose life may have been stolen long before blood was ever spilled. Before we go deeper, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this is not just another crime story. This is one of those cases that gets under your skin and stays there. To the outside world, Dee Dee Blanchard looked like the kind of mother people talk about with admiration. She appeared patient, devoted, and selfless. She seemed like a woman who had surrendered her own happiness in order to care for a daughter burdened by devastating illnesses. People saw a wheelchair-bound girl with a shaved head, a soft voice, and an innocent smile. They heard that she suffered from leukemia, seizures, muscular dystrophy, and a long list of other serious conditions. They were told she had the mental capacity of someone much younger than her age. They believed she needed constant care. And standing beside her through all of it was Dee Dee, smiling gently, speaking for her, guiding her, presenting herself as the loving protector of a child who needed her for everything. It was a story that invited sympathy instantly. Neighbors felt sorry for them. Charities opened their arms to them. Donations came in. Free trips were given. A home was provided through charitable support. Strangers looked at Dee Dee and saw sacrifice. They looked at Gypsy and saw tragedy. Together, they became the kind of story that made people emotional without asking too many questions. But behind that image was a truth so sinister that, once exposed, it changed everything. Because the life people thought they were witnessing was not merely exaggerated. According to investigators and extensive reporting that followed the murder, much of it may have been fabricated. The illnesses, the frailty, the dependency, the helplessness. It was not the tragic reality of a dying child. It was, many believe, a constructed prison built around Gypsy Rose from the time she was very young. And that is what makes this case so chilling. Before anyone ever focused on the homicide, before anyone debated guilt or punishment, there was already another crime taking shape inside that home. A slower crime. A quieter crime. A crime built not with knives or guns, but with manipulation, falsehood, intimidation, and control. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was raised inside a reality that appears to have been curated almost entirely by her mother. Dee Dee allegedly convinced people that Gypsy could not walk, even though she could. She allegedly misrepresented her age. She allegedly pushed her through unnecessary medical treatment and medications. Her head was shaved repeatedly to maintain the image of illness. Her teeth were badly damaged over time. She was infantilized, silenced, and managed. In public, Dee Dee spoke with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to control a room. And Gypsy, seated in that wheelchair, became the centerpiece of a heartbreaking narrative that almost no one dared to challenge. Just think about how terrifying that is. Imagine growing up in a world where everyone around you believes a version of you that is not real. Imagine trying to object, only to realize that the person controlling your life has already convinced everyone else that she is your savior. Imagine knowing that the truth is trapped inside you, but every doorway out of that truth is locked by the very person the world sees as your hero. That kind of captivity does something to the mind. And this is where the emotional core of the story becomes almost unbearable. Because Gypsy was not simply living with lies. She was living inside them. Her identity, her body, her age, her abilities, even her voice in the outside world were filtered through Dee Dee. This was not normal parenting. This was domination disguised as devotion. It was the kind of control so total that Gypsy's existence seems, in many ways, to have belonged more to Dee Dee than to Gypsy herself. But wait, because here is where the story starts becoming even more disturbing. As Gypsy grew older, she began to understand that something was wrong. She could walk. She was more mentally aware than people believed. She started realizing that the image presented to the public was deeply false. Yet awareness did not equal liberation. In fact, it may have made her pain sharper. Because once you recognize your cage, every extra day inside it becomes harder to survive. And how do you escape a cage when the person holding the keys is beloved by everyone around you? That question matters, because it sits at the center of everything that happened next. Reports suggest that Dee Dee did not merely lie about Gypsy's condition. She controlled her movements, restricted her freedom, and allegedly used fear to keep her obedient. Gypsy later described being treated like a child even as she aged and living under a regime where disobedience came with consequences. The house was not just a home. It was, from Gypsy's perspective, a place of performance and surveillance. Everything revolved around Dee Dee's narrative. Everything fed the illusion. And as long as that illusion remained intact, Dee Dee remained powerful. Here's where it gets crazy. In the middle of all that control, Gypsy discovered the internet. For most people, that sounds ordinary. But for someone living a life as restricted as Gypsy's, the internet was not just entertainment. It was a crack in the wall. It was proof that another world existed beyond the one her mother had designed for her. Online, she could communicate without Dee Dee standing over her shoulder. Online, she could be curious, secretive, imaginative, and rebellious. Online, she could begin searching for something she had likely never truly possessed before: agency. And then she met Nicholas Gojon. Their relationship began in secrecy and quickly intensified. For Gypsy, Nicholas may have seemed like an escape route in human form. Someone who saw her, wanted her, and could potentially remove her from the suffocating control of her mother. For Nicholas, the relationship became deeply emotional and dangerously consuming. What should have been an opportunity for help or intervention became something much darker. Their bond fed fantasy, obsession, and eventually violence. This is the moment where the story shifts from heartbreaking to catastrophic. Because when a person is isolated, psychologically controlled, and desperate for deliverance, they do not always imagine healthy ways out. They imagine immediate ways out, extreme ways out, final ways out. That is a terrifying truth, and it seems to echo through this entire case. By June 2015, the situation had reached a breaking point. Inside that small home in Springfield, Missouri, years of lies, resentment, fear, and desperation were pressing towards something irreversible. Gypsy and Nicholas had been communicating. Plans had been forming. The idea of escape had mutated into something lethal. Then came the night that changed everything. Dee Dee went to sleep, likely believing she still controlled the story, still controlled her daughter, still controlled the future. But sometime in the darkness, Nicholas entered her bedroom. What happened next was brutal. Dee Dee Blanchard was stabbed to death in her own bed. It was not a random act. It was not a burglary gone wrong. It was the violent climax of a hidden world collapsing in on itself. And yet, as shocking as that murder was, the strangest part is that the truth did not emerge immediately. At first, the community believed Dee Dee was the victim of a terrible crime and that Gypsy, the defenseless daughter everyone pitied, was in terrible danger. Panic spread quickly. People feared she had been abducted, harmed, or left alone without the care she supposedly needed to survive. The emotional assumptions were immediate because everyone still believed the story they had always been told. Then the Facebook posts appeared. One message from Dee Dee's account suggested she was dead. Another was even more disturbing. Friends and neighbors were horrified. The posts felt grotesque, almost taunting. They triggered alarm, confusion, and urgent calls to authorities. Police were sent to the home. What they found inside was chilling: Dee Dee's body, and no sign of Gypsy. Now imagine that moment from the perspective of the people who knew them. They believed a loving mother had been murdered and her sick, helpless daughter had vanished. It looked like a nightmare. But the nightmare was about to become something no one expected. As investigators followed the digital clues, they traced the posts and eventually located Gypsy and Nicholas in Wisconsin. And when police found her, the illusion that had fooled so many people for so many years shattered instantly. Gypsy could walk. She was not dying. She was not the powerless, childlike invalid the public thought she was. And perhaps most shocking of all, she was not merely a victim waiting to be rescued. She had helped plan the murder. That revelation detonated across the media like a bomb. The public did not know how to process it. Sympathy turned into confusion. Confusion turned into outrage. Outrage turned into something much more uncomfortable: moral uncertainty. Because suddenly this was no longer a simple crime story with obvious roles. The dead mother might have been a long-term abuser. The daughter accused of conspiracy might have been a long-term victim. The man who carried out the killing was now part of a story already saturated with manipulation and fantasy. Every familiar category began to collapse. And that is exactly why this case became unforgettable. It forced people to hold two horrifying realities in their minds at the same time. A woman had been murdered in a deeply violent way. And yet the person connected to that murder may have spent years trapped inside a life built on deception, medical abuse, and coercive control. Neither reality erased the other. They existed together, grinding against each other, making the case feel almost impossible to judge cleanly. If you've made it this far, comment, "Nothing is ever as it seems," because this case proves that some of the darkest truths hide behind the most sympathetic appearances. And if you want more crime stories told with depth, suspense, and emotion, subscribe now and like the video, because we are only halfway through this nightmare. As more details came out, the story became even more emotionally devastating. Gypsy was not just someone who had been lied about. She appears to have been shaped by those lies from childhood. Her mother allegedly controlled the way others saw her, the way doctors treated her, and the way she understood herself. That level of domination does not merely steal freedom. It distorts reality itself. It can leave a person unable to imagine an ordinary escape because ordinary choices were never available to them in the first place. That does not excuse murder, but it does complicate judgment. And this is where so many people became divided. Some looked at Gypsy and saw a young woman driven to desperation by years of abuse. They saw someone who had never been allowed to develop normally, never been given autonomy, and never been taught how to leave in a healthy way. Others saw someone who participated in the planning of a killing and believed that fact had to remain central no matter what suffering came before it. Then there were those who saw both truths at once and found themselves deeply unsettled by that tension. Because what do you do with a case where victimhood and culpability seem to coexist? That is the question at the heart of the Gypsy Rose story, and it is why people still cannot stop talking about it. The legal outcomes eventually came. Gypsy Rose Blanchard pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Nicholas John was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. On paper, that sounds like resolution. But emotionally, the story never resolved at all. It kept mutating, growing, resurfacing through documentaries, interviews, online debates, dramatizations, and public fascination. And maybe that is because this case taps into something deeply unsettling about human nature. We like clear stories. We like obvious villains and obvious victims. We want crime to make moral sense. This case refuses to do that. It offers no clean comfort. It gives you grief, horror, pity, anger, and confusion all at once. But here's the darkest possibility of all. What if Dee Dee had never been killed? What if that night had never happened? Would the truth have ever come out? Would Gypsy have remained trapped for years longer, still wheeled into public view, still presented as sick, still living inside a manufactured identity while the world praised her mother for extraordinary devotion? That possibility is haunting because it suggests that the murder, horrific as it was, may have been the event that finally forced the hidden abuse into public view. And that is almost unbearable to think about. It means the most obvious crime in this case may not have been the first one. It may simply have been the one dramatic enough to expose everything else. That idea lingers over the story, like a storm cloud. It is what gives the case its lasting power. It is not merely about a daughter and a mother. It is about how abuse can camouflage itself as love. It is about how easily public sympathy can be manipulated. It is about how captivity does not always look like chains and locked doors. Sometimes it looks like tenderness. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it wears the face of a caregiver and smiles for the cameras. And when the truth finally cracks through that image, what spills out is rarely simple. In the years since, Gypsy's public life has reignited endless debate. Some people view her as a survivor who emerged from profound psychological and medical abuse. Others remain disturbed by the fact that a brutal murder stands at the center of her story. That friction has never gone away. Every documentary, every interview, every viral conversation seems to revive the same painful question. Who is Gypsy Rose Blanchard, really? A victim? A conspirator? A symbol of both suffering and moral collapse? Perhaps the reason this case remains so magnetic is because it does not allow us to answer that question neatly. And maybe that is the point. Some stories are terrifying because of what happened. This one is terrifying because of what happened before what happened. When you return to that opening image, the shadow entering the bedroom, the sleeping mother, the silence before the violence, it no longer feels like the beginning of a story. It feels like the ending of something that had been festering for years. The lies, the control, the false illnesses, the stolen identity, the impossible desperation, all of it was moving toward a breaking point. And when that breaking point arrived, it did not bring freedom. It brought ruin. That is why this case still grips the world. Because there is no satisfying ending here. A woman died violently. A young woman emerged from one form of captivity into prison and permanent public scrutiny. A crime became entertainment for millions. And a story once built on pity transformed into one of the most ethically disturbing true crime cases in modern memory. Before I end this, I want your honest view in the comments. Do you believe Gypsy Rose was primarily a victim, primarily responsible, or trapped somewhere painfully in between? I really want to know where you stand on this one because few stories divide people like this. If this case shook you, subscribe for more intense and deeply layered crime stories, like the video to help the channel grow, and share this with someone who loves true crime that goes beyond the surface. Because the most dangerous stories are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they grow quietly behind closed doors, hidden beneath smiles, sympathy, and performances so convincing that no one sees the darkness until it is far too late. And by then, the damage is already irreversible.